The text message glared at me from my phone screen. "Cook us dinner. We'll be home by 6. No, please. No, would you mind? Not even a thanks in advance." Just another demand from my family, who had spent the last 2 weeks in Cancun while I stayed behind, working double shifts at the coffee shop and taking care of their house. My finger hovered over the screen, the familiar knot of resentment tightening in my stomach. I had already cleaned their house, watered their plants, and collected their mail. Now they expected me to have dinner waiting when they returned from their vacation, a vacation I hadn't been invited to join. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stared out the window of my parents' suburban home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the well-manicured lawn my father took such pride in. A lawn I had mowed twice during their absence, despite having my own apartment to maintain across town. My shoulders slumped under the weight of their expectations. 4 years of putting myself through college with a scholarship and part-time jobs, and here I was, still being treated like the family servant. My older sister Janet had never experienced this. She dropped out of college after 2 years, married her high school sweetheart Tom, had 2 kids, and somehow became the golden child who could do no wrong. My parents had helped her with a down payment on her house, paid for her wedding, and babysat her children whenever she needed a break. Me? I got congratulated for my independence and self-reliance while being asked to do more and more for the family. I opened the refrigerator, empty except for the basics I had purchased yesterday in anticipation of their return. What was I supposed to make for dinner with just these ingredients? I could drive to the store, spend my own money on food for my family who had just enjoyed 2 weeks of all-inclusive resort dining, then rush back to cook before they arrived. Or my eyes fell on the small stack of moving boxes I had brought over this morning. I had planned to tell my family tonight that I had signed a lease on a new apartment, one that was closer to my job and further from them, one that represented a fresh start away from their constant demands and comparisons. I had been planning a nice dinner to soften the blow, to explain that I needed space to build my own life. But their text message changed everything. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Years of accommodating their needs, of being the responsible one who never complained, of watching my sister receive financial and emotional support while I received nothing but more responsibilities. It all crystallized into a single, clear thought. I was done. I grabbed a pen and a sheet of paper from the junk drawer and began to write. As the words flowed, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. When I finished, I folded the note and propped it against the fruit bowl on the kitchen table. Then I set 6 places at the dining room table, one for each member of my returning family, plus an empty one where I would have sat. I placed my house key next to my plate. Instead of food, I put a copy of my note at each place setting. Then, I gathered my few possessions, loaded them into my car, and drove away from my parents' house for what I hoped would be the last time. As I turned the corner at the end of their street, I caught a glimpse of the airport shuttle pulling up to their house in my rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I navigated through afternoon traffic toward my new apartment. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years felt lighter with each mile I put between myself and their home. I had spent most of my life being the good daughter, the one who never complained, who always did what was expected without question. But today, I had finally chosen myself. My phone started buzzing with incoming calls and texts almost immediately. I silenced it and kept driving. Whatever they had to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. The sky was turning a deep purple by the time I pulled into the parking lot of my new apartment building. It wasn't much, a small 1-bedroom in a modest complex, but it was mine, and it was paid for with money I had earned. Unlike Janet's sprawling suburban home, which our parents had helped finance, every square inch of this place represented my own hard work and determination. As I carried the first box up the stairs to Unit 307, I thought about what my mother's face must have looked like when she read my note. I've given everything I can give. It's time for me to live my own life. Don't call. Don't visit. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Short. Direct. Probably shocking to people who were used to me never setting boundaries. By midnight, I had brought all my boxes up from the car and collapsed onto my bare mattress on the floor. I still needed to buy furniture, kitchen supplies, and 100 other things to make this place livable. But as I stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of my new neighbors, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't yet hung curtains over. For a panicked moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The text message, my decision, the note, walking. Away, I reached for my phone and winced at what I saw. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 5 voicemails, all from my family. I took a deep breath and deleted them all without listening or reading. Whatever they had to say, I knew it would be designed to pull me back into the role I had played for so long, the reliable one, the one who never complained, the one who always came through for everyone else while expecting nothing in return. I couldn't go back to that. Not now. Not after taking this first step toward freedom. My shift at the coffee shop started at 10 a.m. I showered quickly, dressed in my black shirt and khakis, and headed out, stopping only to grab a bagel from the shop on the corner. As I walked through the doors of been there, done that, I steeled myself for the possibility that my family might show up to confront me here. They knew my work schedule after all. "You look like hell," said Marco, my manager, as I tied my apron behind my back. "Big night?" "Big life change," I replied, forcing a smile. "I moved into a new apartment." "No kidding? That's great, Shirley." He handed me a clean towel. "Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you. The assistant manager position is opening up next month when Danny leaves for grad school. I think you should apply." I blinked in surprise. "Really? I've only been here 8 months, and in that time, you've never been late, never called out sick, and have more positive customer comments than anyone else on staff." He shrugged. "Just think about it, okay? It would mean more hours and better pay." As I took my place behind the counter, I felt a small spark of hope ignite inside me. An assistant manager position could change everything. More financial stability, a career path instead of just a job, the ability to truly stand on my own without any risk of needing to ask my family for help. Not that I ever had, but the fear had always been there, lurking in the back of my mind. The morning rush kept me too busy to dwell on my family situation. I lost myself in the rhythm of the work, taking orders, making drinks, smiling at customers. It wasn't until my break at 1 p.m. that I checked my phone again. The number of missed calls and messages had doubled. And now there was a new development. Janet had posted a long, dramatic Facebook status about how families should stick together through hard times and how heartbroken she was that someone had abandoned their responsibilities. I snorted and put my phone away without responding. Of course, Janet would make this about her. She had 2 children and a husband who barely worked, choosing instead to pursue his art while my sister supported the family with her part-time receptionist job and considerable help from our parents. She had been living rent-free in our parents' second house for the past 3 years, the house that had once belonged to our grandmother, the house I had hoped to live in someday. The rest of my shift passed without incident, though I kept glancing nervously at the door every time it opened, half expecting to see my father's stern face or my mother's tear-stained one. By closing time, I was exhausted but relieved. I had made it through the first day. As I helped Marco clean up, he brought up the assistant manager position again. "Applications are due by the end of next week," he said casually as he counted the cash drawer. "Just so you know." "I'll think about it," I promised, though in truth, I had already decided to apply. What did I have to lose? The walk back to my new apartment took me past a thrift store I had never noticed before. The window display featured a small dining table with 2 chairs, exactly what I needed for my kitchen nook. On impulse, I went inside and found not only the table and chairs for a price I could afford, but also a floor lamp, some kitchen basics, and a slightly worn but still comfortable armchair. The owner, an older woman named Gloria, even offered to deliver everything to my apartment the next day for a small additional fee. As I walked the remaining blocks home, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. I was building my new life, piece by piece. The crushing guilt I had expected to feel after leaving my family hadn't materialized. Instead, I felt lighter with each passing hour, as if I had set down a heavy backpack I had been carrying for years without realizing how much it weighed. The next morning, I woke up early despite not having a shift at the coffee shop. My apartment was bathed in golden light, and for a moment, I just lay there, appreciating the silence. No sounds of my father watching the news at full volume. No mother banging pots and pans in the kitchen while complaining that no one helped her. No phone calls from Janet asking me to babysit on short notice because she and Tom wanted to go out. I made a cup of instant coffee, mental note, buy a coffee, maker, and sat on my mattress, finally ready to face the messages my family had been sending. I started with the texts, scrolling through dozens of variations on the same themes: shock, guilt trips, demands for explanations, and increasingly, anger. How could you do this to us? Mom, after everything we've done for you. Dad, the kids are asking where Aunt Shirley is. What am I supposed to tell them? Janet, your mother hasn't stopped crying. Dad, if you needed space, you could have talked to us instead of pulling this childish stunt. Mom, I always knew you were selfish, but this is a new low. Janet. Each message landed like a small dart, but I found they didn't penetrate as deeply as they once would have. The voicemails were more of the same, though hearing the actual tremor in my mother's voice and the cold fury in my father's was harder to dismiss than the written words. The last message was from Janet, left late last night. Look, I don't know what kind of quarter-life crisis you're having, but you need to get over yourself. Mom and Dad have done everything for you, paid for your education, given you a place to live, supported your career choices, and this is how you repay them? By running away when they ask you for one small favor? Grow up, Shirley. The world doesn't revolve around you. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Paid for my education? I had earned a full scholarship and worked part-time jobs throughout. College to cover my living expenses. Given me a place to live? I had moved back in with them briefly after graduation at their insistence, only to find myself charged rent that was higher than what I eventually paid for my own apartment. Supported my career choices? They had done nothing but belittle my decision to major in business administration, constantly comparing me to cousins who had gone into medicine or law. The revision of history was breathtaking in its audacity. But it was also familiar. This was how it had always been. My experiences, my struggles, my achievements minimized or erased entirely to fit the family narrative. In their story, I was the ungrateful daughter who had been given everything and appreciated nothing. The truth, that I had fought for every opportunity while watching my sister receive actual support, was inconvenient and therefore ignored. I deleted all the messages and blocked their numbers. Maybe someday we could have a relationship based on mutual respect, but that day was not today. Today, I needed to focus on building my new life. The furniture arrived mid-morning, transforming my empty apartment into something that felt more like a home. Gloria, the thrift store owner, even threw in some mismatched dishes and a set of cutlery she said she couldn't sell. Every new place needs a little housewarming, she said, with a kind smile before leaving. I spent the afternoon arranging my meager possessions and making lists of things I needed to buy. Basic necessities first: shower curtain, bedding, towels. Then gradually, as money allowed, the small luxuries that would make this place truly mine. A knock at my door around 4 p.m. sent my heart racing. Had they found me already? I peered through the peephole and sagged with relief when I saw it was just my new neighbor from across the hall, an older man with kind eyes who introduced himself as Mr. Chen. "I saw the delivery truck earlier," he said, holding out a small plant in a terra-cotta pot. "I thought you might like this for your new home. It's a peace lily. Very hard to kill, even for people who aren't good with plants." I accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, touched by this simple act of kindness from a stranger. We chatted. Briefly, he had lived in the building for 20 years, was retired from teaching high school mathematics, and knew all the best takeout places in the neighborhood. Before leaving, he mentioned that the building had a small community garden on the roof that residents were welcome to use. "I grow tomatoes and peppers in the summer," he said. "There's an empty planter box if you're interested." After he left, I placed the peace lily on my new dining table and stood back to admire the effect. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I tensed, thinking my family had found a way around my blocks. But it was just Marco from the coffee shop, checking if I was available to cover a shift tomorrow for someone who had called in sick. I replied immediately that I could, grateful for the extra hours and the distraction. That night, I slept better than I had in years, on my mattress on the floor of my nearly empty apartment, surrounded by the beginnings of my independent life. For the first time, I went to sleep and woke up on my own terms, without the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. I worked extra shifts at the coffee shop whenever possible, applied for the assistant manager position, and slowly furnished my apartment with thrift store finds and the occasional splurge from Target. I started a small herb garden in the planter box Mr. Chen had mentioned, planted with seedlings he helped me select. I also made a few tentative friendships, Gloria from the thrift store, who invited me to a community dinner at her church. Tara, another barista at Bean There who was around my age and shared my love of true crime podcasts, and of course, Mr. Chen, who seemed to have adopted me as the granddaughter he never had. My family had eventually stopped trying to contact me directly after I blocked their numbers, but they found other ways to reach out. My cousin Michael called to say he was worried about me. A former college roommate messaged to say my mother had contacted her on Facebook, frantically trying to make sure I was safe. Janet left scathing comments on weeks-old Instagram photos. I maintained my silence, not ready to be pulled back into their orbit. 3 weeks after I moved out, Marco called me into his office at the end of my shift. My stomach twisted with anxiety. Had my family made a scene at the coffee shop while I wasn't there? Had they somehow gotten me fired? "I've got good news," Marco said, gesturing for me to sit down. "The position for assistant manager is yours. If you want it, you are the standout candidate." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by excitement. "Really? That's thank you. Yes, I definitely want it." "Great." He slid a folder across the desk. "Here's all the paperwork. You'll get $1.50 more per hour, plus eligibility for benefits after 90 days in the new position. And we'll need to adjust your schedule. Assistant managers open the shop 3 days a week." I leafed through the papers, barely able to believe this was happening. With this promotion, I could actually start saving money instead of just scraping by. I could build a real life here, one that was entirely my own. "One more thing," Marco added as I stood to leave. "A woman came in yesterday asking for you, said she was your mother. I told her we don't give out information about our employees. Just thought you should know." My happiness dimmed slightly. Of course they wouldn't leave me alone, even now. "Thanks for not telling her anything." "No problem. Everyone's got family stuff." He shrugged. "Just keep doing what you're doing here, and we'll get along fine." I walked home in a daze, clutching the folder with my promotion paperwork. The late afternoon sun warmed my face, and I found myself smiling despite the news about my mother's visit to the coffee shop. They could try all they wanted to pull me back, but I was moving forward now. When I reached my apartment building, I checked my mailbox for the first time in days and found a letter from Janet. I recognized her looping. Handwriting immediately. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her handwriting. "Shirley, I don't understand why you're doing this to our family. Mom and Dad have been beside themselves with worry. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof, and Mom hasn't been sleeping. All because you decided to throw a tantrum over being asked to cook dinner. It's selfish and childish. The kids miss you." Tyler asked for his aunt. Shirley the other day, and I didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that his aunt abandoned her family without a word? And I don't know if you care, but we're struggling financially right now. Tom's art show got canceled, and the gallery owner said his work isn't commercial. Enough. Mom and Dad are helping us with bills, but it's putting a strain on them. They're not as young as they used to be. They can't keep supporting all of us forever. I know we've had our differences, but we're family. That means something, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. It's time to stop this ridiculous silent treatment and come home. We all make sacrifices. That's what family is about. Call Mom. She cries herself to sleep every night. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, my hands shaking slightly. The familiar cocktail of guilt, anger, and resentment swirled in my stomach. Janet's letter hit all the usual notes: health concerns for our parents, emotional pleas about the children, financial struggles, and of course, the implication that I was selfish for putting my own needs first. What she conveniently left out was any acknowledgement of the years I had spent giving to this family while receiving nothing in return. No mention of the fact that Tom had been struggling as an artist for the entirety of their 8-year marriage, while Janet worked part-time and relied on our parents to make up the difference. No recognition that I had been the one to drive our father to his doctor's appointments after his minor heart attack 2 years ago, or that I had been the one to help our mother recover from her knee surgery last year. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the joy of my promotion now overshadowed by Janet's guilt trip. As I unlocked my door, I resolved to put the letter out of my mind. This was exactly why I had left: the constant emotional manipulation, the one-sided expectations, the revision of reality to cast me as the villain and them as the victims. Inside my apartment, I placed the letter on my small dining table and sat staring at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and did something I had been avoiding for weeks. I logged into my online banking account to check the joint account I still technically shared with my parents. The account had been opened when I was 16, with my parents as co-signers since I was a minor. I had used it throughout college, carefully managing the scholarship disbursements and my part-time job earnings. After graduation, I had opened a new account at a different bank, but had kept the old one active with a small balance, mostly out of inertia. What I saw now made my blood run cold. The account had been drained. Every penny of the 1,128.43 yards that had been there the last time I checked was gone. There was a single withdrawal for the exact amount, made at a branch near my parents' house 3 days after I had moved out. I sat back in my chair, stunned. They had taken my money. Not a huge amount, but money I had earned and saved. Money that would have bought a real bed frame, maybe a small couch, groceries for a month. They had simply helped themselves to it, presumably as some sort of punishment for my departure or compensation for the sacrifices they had made for me. The anger that surged through me was clarifying. Any lingering doubt or guilt about my decision to cut ties evaporated. I closed the account immediately and then, hands still shaking, typed out a text message to my mother's number, temporarily, unblocking her to send it. "I know you emptied my bank account. That money was mine. Consider it the last contribution I will ever make to this family. Do not contact me again." I blocked her number again before she could reply, then did the same for my father and Janet. For good measure, I also blocked my cousin Michael and the few other relatives who might be enlisted to reach out to me. Then I shut off my phone entirely and went to bed, too angry and hurt to do anything else. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt before. The betrayal of having my account drained had severed something inside me, the last threads of obligation and guilt that had kept me tethered to my family even as I tried to build a new life without them. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Family Documentation and began updating the document I had started the day after I moved out. In methodical detail, I recorded the emptying of my bank account, Janet's letter, and my mother's visit to my workplace. I attached screenshots of the bank statement showing the withdrawal. It felt important somehow to keep a record, to have evidence that I wasn't crazy or selfish for wanting to escape. Then I got ready for my shift at the coffee shop, my first as the new assistant manager. I had a life to build, and I couldn't let my family's actions derail me. As I locked my apartment door behind me, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let them take anything more from me, not my money, not my peace of mind, not my future. The coffee shop was busy that morning, a steady stream of commuters needing their caffeine fix before work. I threw myself into the familiar routine, grateful for the distraction. Marco spent the first hour showing me the additional responsibilities that came with my new position, managing inventory, handling the cash deposits, scheduling staff. It was both exciting and a little overwhelming. "You'll get the hang of it," he assured me when he saw my expression. "I wouldn't have promoted you if I didn't think you could handle it." His confidence in me was touching, especially coming on the heels of my family's betrayal. Here was someone who saw my worth, who valued my contributions without expecting me to sacrifice myself for the greater good. It was a novel experience. During a lull mid-morning, I checked my email on the shop's computer and found a notification that a certified letter was waiting for me at the post office. My heart sank. It had to be from my family, and given that it was certified mail requiring a signature, it probably wasn't good news. Legal threats, perhaps? I couldn't imagine what else would warrant that level of formality. After my shift ended, I walked to the post office and collected the letter. As I had suspected, it was from my father, his precise handwriting unmistakable on the envelope. I waited until I was back in my apartment to open it, bracing myself for whatever fresh hell they had decided to unleash. Inside was a formal-looking document and a brief note on my father's personal stationery. "Shirley, your mother and I are deeply disappointed by your recent behavior. The withdrawal from your account was to cover the rent you owed us for the 2 months before you moved out, as well as compensation for the emotional distress you have caused your mother. Enclosed is an itemized bill for additional expenses we have incurred on your behalf over the years. We expect payment in full within 30 days. If we do not hear from you, we will be forced to pursue legal action." The enclosed document was indeed an itemized bill listing supposed expenses dating back to my childhood. Private school tuition, which had been covered by a scholarship I earned, the portion of family vacations attributable to me, health, insurance premiums during college, which had been part of my scholarship package, and most ludicrously, the market value of meals eaten at their home during visits after I moved to my first apartment in college. The total came to just over $50,000, a number so ridiculous it would have been laughable if it weren't so clearly designed to intimidate me. My father, an accountant by profession, had even calculated interest on some of the older debts. I sat at my small dining table for a long time. The letter spread out before me, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was a clear attempt to financially cripple me, to force me back into dependence on them. They knew I didn't have that kind of money. They knew I couldn't possibly pay such a bill. That was the point. With shaking hands, I added this latest development to my family documentation folder, scanning both the note and the itemized bill. Then, I did something I had been reluctant to do until now. I researched family law attorneys in my area and sent emails to 3 whose websites seemed promising, briefly explaining my situation and asking about initial consultations. I might not have $50,000, but I had truth on my side. And for the first time, I was willing to fight back, instead of simply absorbing the blows and trying to keep the peace. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I found myself thinking about Janet's children, my niece and nephew. Tyler, age 4, and Mia, age 6, were the only members of my family I genuinely missed. Unlike their parents, they had never demanded anything of me except love and attention. I had been a consistent presence in their lives from the day they were born, often babysitting for free so Janet and Tom could have date nights, or so Tom could attend art shows and networking events. The thought that they might be confused or hurt by my sudden absence brought tears to my eyes. But what else could I have done? Stayed in a toxic situation forever for their sake? That wouldn't have been healthy for any of us in the long run. Still, I promised myself that somehow, someday, I would find a way to reconnect with them on my own terms, away from the dysfunction of our family system. Sleep eventually came, but it was fitful and filled with dreams of drowning, of trying to swim to the surface while unseen hands pulled me back down into the depths. The next day brought a response from one of the attorneys I had contacted. Catherine Wong offered a free 30-minute consultation and could see me the following week. I booked the appointment immediately, relieved to have taken a concrete step toward protecting myself. Work that day was hectic. One of our regular baristas called in sick, and the espresso machine started acting up mid-morning, leading to a backup of orders and some disgruntled customers. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted and still had to grocery shop on the way home. I was standing in the cereal aisle of the small market near my apartment, debating between granola or my favorite sugary childhood cereal, a small rebellion, since my mother had never allowed junk cereals in her house, when I heard a familiar voice that made my blood freeze. "Shirley? Oh my God, it is you!" I turned slowly to find Janet's best friend Melissa standing there, a shopping basket over her arm and a look of exaggerated surprise on her face. Melissa and I had never been close. She had always struck me as judgmental and nosy, traits that made her the perfect friend for my sister. "Hi, Melissa," I said cautiously, already looking for the quickest exit route. "I thought that was you. What a coincidence." Her eyes swept over me, taking in my coffee shop uniform and probably noting the dark circles under my eyes. "Janet told me about your situation. The whole family is so worried about you." I doubted that very much. "I'm fine, as you can see. Just shopping for groceries like a normal adult." Of course. She stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But sweetie, you've got your whole family in an uproar. Your mom is beside herself, and your dad, well, Janet says he's talking about cutting you out of the will if you don't come to your senses soon." I almost laughed aloud at that. What will? As far as I knew, my parents had few assets beyond their house and modest retirement accounts. And given their pattern of financial behavior, I suspected Janet and her family would be the sole beneficiaries regardless of my actions. "Thanks for the concern, Melissa, but I really need to finish my shopping and get home." I placed the sugary cereal in my basket, a small act of defiance. She put a hand on my arm, stopping me from moving away. "Janet just wants what's best for you, you know. We all do. Whatever happened, I'm sure it can be worked out if you just talk to them. Family is everything, Shirley." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "I appreciate the thought, but this isn't your business. Please tell Janet that if she wants to discuss anything with me, she can do it directly instead of sending messengers or writing manipulative letters." Melissa's friendly facade cracked slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You know, Janet always said you had a chip on your shoulder." I guess she was right. Goodbye, Melissa. I turned and walked away, abandoning my half-filled shopping basket on a nearby shelf. My appetite had disappeared, replaced by a burning sensation in my chest that was becoming all too familiar whenever I thought about my family. Outside the cool evening air, I leaned against the wall of the market and took several deep breaths. The encounter with Melissa had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Not because of anything she had said, but because it confirmed what I had suspected. My family was activating their social network to pressure me, to make it impossible for me to simply walk away and start fresh. This was a small city. There would be more Melissas, More chance encounters, more reports back to Janet and my parents about my whereabouts and activities. The thought made me feel hunted, cornered, but it also strengthened my resolve. I hadn't come this far, broken free from years of emotional and financial exploitation, only to be bullied back into submission by proxy. I walked home without groceries, that night opting for delivery pizza instead. As I ate, sitting cross-legged on my mattress on the floor, I made a new entry in my documentation folder about the encounter with Melissa. Then I did something I had been avoiding. I logged into my social media accounts and changed my privacy settings to the highest possible level, unfriending mutual acquaintances who I suspected might report back to my family. And in some cases, deleting accounts entirely. It felt like erasing part of myself, but it also felt necessary. I needed a clean break, a fresh start without the constant threat of surveillance and intervention. I needed space to figure out who I was outside of the role I had been assigned in my family drama. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in days, as if the act of cutting those digital ties had liberated something inside me. In my dreams, I was flying above a landscape that grew more distant and indistinct with each passing moment, until it was nothing but a blur below me as I soared into clear blue sky. The attorney's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, its exterior painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. Catherine Wong met me in a small conference room, her manner brisk but kind. I had brought my folder of documentation, which she reviewed carefully while I explained my situation. "So to summarize," she said when I finished, "your parents are demanding $50,000 from you for expenses they claim to have incurred during your childhood and young adulthood. They've threatened legal action if you don't pay within 30 days. They also withdrew approximately $1,700 from a joint account without your permission after you moved out of their home." "That's correct," I confirmed, feeling strangely calm now, that I was discussing the situation with a professional rather than trying to handle it alone. She tapped her pen against her legal pad thoughtfully. "The good news is that their demand for $50,000 has no legal merit whatsoever. Parents are legally obligated to provide for their minor children food, shelter, education, health care. They can't retroactively bill you for those expenses once. You're an adult. It's a scare tactic, nothing more." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "And the money they took from the joint account?" "That's more complicated," she admitted. "Since it was a joint account, legally they had the right to withdraw funds, just as you did. It's ethically questionable, especially if the money was clearly yours, but from a legal standpoint, there's not much to be done about it." I nodded, having suspected as much. "So what should I do about their demand for payment?" "Do nothing," she advised firmly. "Don't respond, don't engage. If they do file a lawsuit, which I highly doubt they will, you'll be served with papers, and we can respond appropriately at that time. But it would be a frivolous suit that any judge would dismiss." "What about protecting myself going forward? I'm worried about what else they might do." Catherine leaned forward, her expression serious. "Based on what you've told me, your parents seem to be using financial manipulation as a way to control you. The best protection is to ensure they have no access to your current finances. New bank accounts they're not aware of, at institutions they don't use. Credit monitoring to ensure they can't open accounts in your name. A P.O. box for mail, so they don't know your physical address." We spent the remainder of the consultation discussing practical steps I could take to protect myself financially and legally. By the time I left her office, I had a clear action plan and felt more confident than I had in weeks. The $300 consultation fee was a small price to pay for the peace of mind it brought me. As I walked to the bus stop, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. My heart sank when I read it. "Shirley, it's Dad. We need to talk about this situation before it gets any more out of hand. I'm at the Starbucks on 3rd Street. Please come meet me, just to talk." How had he gotten this number? I had changed phones and carriers after the bank account incident, specifically to avoid this sort of thing. Then I remembered I had put my new number on a job application at a bookstore last week as a backup option in case the assistant manager position hadn't come through. My father knew the owner. It wasn't a stretch to imagine him asking for my contact information under some pretense. For a brief moment, I was tempted to meet him. Despite everything, he was still my father. Maybe he genuinely wanted to resolve things peacefully. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't involve complete estrangement. But then I remembered Catherine's advice. Don't engage. And I remembered the countless times throughout my life when I had given my family the benefit of the doubt, only to be disappointed or manipulated or taken advantage of once again. The pattern was clear and consistent. There was no reason to believe this time would be different. I blocked the new number without responding and continued to the bus stop, my hands shaking slightly, but my resolve intact. As the bus carried me back toward my apartment, I gazed out the window at the city streets bathed in late afternoon sunlight and allowed myself to imagine a future where I was truly free, not just physically separated from my family, but emotionally liberated from their influence. What would that look like? A career I enjoyed, perhaps management at the coffee shop or something else entirely. A home that reflected my tastes and needs rather than what was most convenient for others. Friendships, and maybe eventually a romantic relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or dependency. The freedom to make choices without calculating their impact on a complex web of family expectations and demands. It sounded like a dream, but for the first time, it also felt possible. Not easy, not immediate, but possible. And that was enough to keep me moving forward, one day at a time. When I reached my apartment building, Mr. Chen was watering the potted plants in the small courtyard entrance. He waved when he saw me, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Perfect timing," he called. "I made too much beef stew. Would you like some?" The simple kindness of the offer brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them away quickly and smiled back. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you." An hour later, sitting at Mr. Chen's meticulously organized dining table, eating delicious homemade stew and listening to his stories about teaching high school math for 30 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Not the temporary relief of escaping a tense situation, but a deeper sense of rightness and belonging. "You know," Mr. Chen said as he served me a second helping without asking if I wanted one, "family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who treats you like you matter." I looked up, startled by how closely his words aligned with my earlier thoughts on the bus. "My actual family isn't. We're not close right now," I said cautiously. He nodded, unsurprised. "I noticed no one has come to help you settle in. No parents bringing housewarming gifts or siblings helping move furniture." He shrugged. "It's not my business, but if you ever need help hanging a picture or moving a bookshelf, that's what neighbors are for." The lump in my throat made it hard to respond, so I just nodded gratefully. As I helped him clean up after dinner, I realized that I had spent an entire meal without feeling judged, manipulated, or inadequate, without being compared to someone else or reminded of how I was failing to meet expectations. It was just two people sharing food and conversation, with no hidden agenda or emotional debt being accrued. If this was what normal human interaction felt like, I wanted more of it. The next few days brought a flurry of activity as I implemented the protective measures Catherine had recommended. I opened a new account at a credit union across town, set up a P.O. box for important mail, and enrolled in a credit monitoring service. I even consulted with my apartment building manager about security concerns, though I was careful not to alarm him with too many details about my situation. "We don't give out resident information to anyone," he assured me. "But it wouldn't hurt to add a note to your file that no one should be let into your apartment for any reason without your explicit permission, even family members claiming an emergency." Work at the coffee shop was going well. My new responsibilities as assistant manager kept me busy, and Marco had been impressed with how quickly I was learning the inventory and scheduling systems. The regular customers had started to recognize me, greeting me by name and sometimes lingering to chat during slow periods. One such customer was a woman named Dr. Rivera, a psychology professor at the local university who came in every morning for a large latte with an extra shot. After several friendly exchanges, she mentioned that she specialized in family systems theory and ran a support group for adults dealing with family estrangement. "It's more common than people think," she said one morning as I handed her the latte. "Our culture puts so much emphasis on family bonds that people who need to establish boundaries with toxic relatives often feel isolated and ashamed. The group provides a space where they can share experiences without judgment." I hesitated, then asked, "How would someone join a group like that?" She smiled gently, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I'll bring you a flyer tomorrow. The group meets weekly and new members are always welcome." True to her word, she brought me information about the support group the next day. I tucked the flyer into my apron pocket, not yet sure if I was ready for that step, but grateful for the option. That evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner in my kitchen, my phone rang with yet another unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, assuming it was my father or Janet trying a new approach. But something made me answer this time. "Hello? Aunt Shirley?" A small, hesitant voice came through the speaker. "It's Mia, my niece." My heart contracted painfully. "Mia, hi, sweetie. How did you get this number?" "I used Mommy's phone when she was in the shower," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I miss you. Why don't you come visit anymore? Are you mad at us?" I sat down at my table, unprepared for the wave of emotion that washed over me. "No, honey, I'm not mad at you or Tyler. I could never be mad at you two. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements, but it has nothing to do with you, I promise." "Mommy says you're being selfish," she reported matter-of-factly. "She says you abandoned your family." Hearing Janet's manipulative language repeated in my 6-year-old niece's innocent voice filled me with a renewed surge of anger toward my sister. "That's not true, Mia. I just needed to live in my own place and take care of myself for a while." "Can we come visit you? Tyler keeps asking when we'll see you again." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "Not right now, sweetie, but maybe someday soon, okay? I miss you and Tyler very much." "I drew you a picture at school," she said, her voice brightening. "It's you and me and Tyler at the park. Daddy says it's really good." "I bet it is," I said, smiling despite the ache in my chest. "You've always been an amazing artist." "Aunt Shirley, I have to go. Mommy's coming back. Don't tell her I called, okay? It's a secret." "Okay, it's our secret," I promised, hating that I was asking her to keep secrets, but knowing Janet would be furious if she found out about the call. "I love you, Mia. Tell Tyler I love him too." "Love you too," she whispered, and then the call ended. I sat at my table for a long time afterward, staring at nothing, the half-prepared vegetables for my dinner forgotten. The conversation with Mia had both warmed and broken my heart. I missed those children desperately, but I couldn't see a way to maintain a relationship with them without being pulled back into the toxic dynamics with their parents and my parents. Eventually, I roused myself and finished making dinner, though I had little appetite. As I ate, I made a decision. I would attend Dr. Rivera's support group. I needed to talk to people who understood what I was going through, who had faced similar, impossible choices, and could perhaps help me find a way forward that allowed for some connection with my niece and nephew without sacrificing my own well-being. The support group met in a community room at the university library every Thursday evening. I arrived 10 minutes early the following week, nervously clutching a coffee cup and wondering if I was making a mistake. What if I wasn't estranged enough to belong here? What if my family problems seemed trivial compared to everyone else's? Dr. Rivera spotted me hovering near the entrance and came over immediately, her warm smile putting me slightly more at ease. "Shirley, I'm so glad you decided to join us. Come in, let me introduce you to everyone. The group consisted of 8 other people ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. As we went around the circle for introductions, I was struck by the diversity of their experiences. A man who had cut ties with his emotionally abusive mother after decades of trying to maintain a relationship. A woman whose parents had disowned her when she came out as gay. A middle-aged couple who had been forced to distance themselves from their adult son due to his untreated mental illness and substance abuse issues. Despite the differences in their situations, there were common threads that resonated deeply with me. The guilt, the second-guessing, the pressure from others to reconcile, the grief for what they had hoped their family relationships could be. When it was my turn to share, I found myself speaking more openly than I had with anyone except Catherine, the attorney. I told them about the years of being the responsible one while watching my sister receive all the support and resources. About moving back in after college, only to find myself charged exorbitant rent while Janet lived rent-free in our grandmother's house. About the final straw, the demand to cook dinner after they returned from a vacation I hadn't been invited to join. About the drained bank account, the ridiculous bill for my childhood expenses, the ongoing harassment through mutual acquaintances. No one interrupted. No one told me I was overreacting or that family should come first no matter what. They just listened, nodding in recognition at parts of my story that echoed their own experiences. When I finished, Dr. Rivera said gently, "What you're describing is a family system where you were assigned the role of giver while your sister was assigned the role of taker. The system depends on you continuing to accept that role, which is why there's been such a strong reaction to your decision to step out of it." "Exactly," said a woman named Rachel, who had shared earlier about her estrangement from her parents. "They're not mad because they miss you as a person. They're mad because the system is broken without you playing your part." "But how do I deal with the guilt?" I asked, voicing the question that had been plaguing me despite my certainty that I had made the right choice. Especially about my niece and nephew. They're innocent in all this, but they're the ones being hurt by my absence. Several people nodded in understanding. An older man named Jack spoke up. "That's the hardest part. My grandchildren were young when I cut ties with my son. I missed years of their lives. But eventually, when they were old enough, we established our own relationship separate from their father. It takes time, and it's painful, but it's possible." For the next hour, the group discussed strategies for managing guilt, setting boundaries, and dealing with flying monkeys, the term they used for people like Melissa, who carried messages or applied pressure on behalf of estranged family members. By the time the meeting ended, I felt both emotionally exhausted and strangely lighter, as if sharing my story had relieved some of the pressure that had been building inside me. Dr. Rivera caught up with me as I was leaving. "I noticed you mentioned your niece called you recently," she said. "That's a complex situation. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one session to discuss strategies for maintaining some contact with the children without compromising your boundaries with their parents?" I nodded gratefully. "That would be really helpful, thank you." "And surely," she added, her expression serious, "what you're doing, prioritizing your own well-being after years of putting others first. It's not selfish. It's necessary. It's healthy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I drove home that night with Dr. Rivera's words echoing in my mind. Not selfish, necessary, healthy. It was the validation I had been seeking without realizing it. Permission to continue on the path I had chosen, despite the guilt and doubt that still nagged at me in quiet moments. The next morning at the coffee shop, I was in a better mood than I had been in weeks. The clarity I had gained from the support group made it easier to focus on my work and to interact with customers without the constant undercurrent of anxiety. That had been my companion since moving out of my parents' house. During a brief lull between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, Marco asked me to help him inventory the storage room. As we counted bags of coffee beans and boxes of paper cups, he mentioned casually, "So, a guy came in yesterday asking about you. Said he was your brother-in-law." My good mood evaporated instantly. "Tom? What did he want?" He didn't say specifically, just asked if you worked here and when your next shift would be. Marco must have seen the alarm on my face because he quickly added, I told him we don't give out employee schedules to anyone, even family. He seemed annoyed but left without a fuss. Thanks for that, I said, relief mingling with renewed anxiety. My family situation is complicated right now. Marco nodded understandingly. I figured as much. Want me to put the word out to all staff? Not to give anyone information about you? Would you mind? I'm trying to keep some distance from them right now. Consider it done, he said simply, and went back to counting coffee sleeves as if we had been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. His matter-of-fact acceptance of my boundaries, without demanding explanations or trying to play mediator, was refreshing. It reinforced what I was slowly coming to realize. Healthy relationships didn't require the constant sacrifice and justification that I had grown accustomed to within my family. The rest of the day passed without incident, but I found myself looking up every time the door opened, half expecting to see Tom or Janet or my parents walking in. The knowledge that they were actively trying to track me down at work left me feeling exposed and vulnerable, despite Marco's assurances that he would protect my privacy. When my shift ended, I took a circuitous route home, paranoid that I might be followed. It was an exhausting way to live, constantly looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see an alternative as long as my family refused to respect my boundaries. Back at my apartment, I found a small package leaning against my door. My first instinct was suspicion. Had my family somehow found my address? But the handwriting on the label wasn't familiar, and when I cautiously opened it, I found a beautiful hand-thrown ceramic mug with a note. For your morning coffee. Welcome to the building. Gloria from 401. I had met Gloria briefly in the laundry room a few days earlier, a writer in her 50s who lived on the top floor. We had chatted about books while waiting for our clothes to dry. I hadn't expected the conversation to lead to a gift, but here it was, a small, thoughtful gesture from someone who owed me nothing. Later that evening, as I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, drinking tea from my new mug, I reflected on the contrast between the relationships I had been born into and the ones I was beginning to build for myself. My family demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and conformity to their expectations, while these new connections, Marco, Mr. Chen, Gloria, the support group members, asked for nothing beyond basic human courtesy and offered acceptance and kindness in return. It was a revelation. For so long, I had believed that relationships were inherently transactional, that love came with conditions and price tags. I had assumed that the dysfunctional dynamics of my family were normal, that everyone felt the constant pressure to prove their worth through service and self-denial. But here was evidence to the contrary. Here were people who gave without expecting anything in return, who respected boundaries without taking offense, who valued me simply for being myself rather than for what I could do for them. Maybe this was what actual family was supposed to feel like, not the biological accident of shared DNA, but the chosen connection between people who genuinely cared for each other's well-being. Maybe I wasn't walking away from family after all, but toward a truer version of it. The thought brought both comfort and grief. Comfort in the possibility of healthier connections ahead, grief for the relationships I had hoped my actual family could provide, but never had. I allowed myself to feel both emotions fully as the sky darkened and stars began to appear above the city. The next morning was Saturday, my day off from the coffee shop. I slept late for the first time in weeks, luxuriating in the knowledge that I had nowhere to be and no one to answer to. After a leisurely breakfast, I decided to tackle a project I had been putting off, hanging some artwork and photos to make my apartment feel more like home. Mr. Chen had loaned me a drill and shown me how to find studs in the wall to ensure the heavier frames would be secure. As I worked, carefully measuring and marking where each piece should go, I found myself smiling. This simple act of decorating my own space, making decisions based solely on my own preferences, felt revolutionary after years of deferring to others. I was about to hang the last piece, a watercolor of the mountains I had bought from a street artist during my sophomore year of college, when there was a knock at my door. Assuming it was Mr. Chen checking on my progress with the drill, I opened it without hesitation. Janet stood in the hallway, Tyler balanced on her hip, and Mia half hidden behind her legs. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both too shocked to speak. Then Tyler let out a delighted shriek and reached for me. "Auntie Shirley, Mommy, found you!" Janet's expression was a complex mixture of triumph, anger, and something that might have been genuine concern. "Hi, sis," she said, her voice tight. "Mind if we come in?" I hesitated, acutely aware that letting them into my apartment meant letting my carefully constructed boundary be breached. But with the children right there, looking up at me with hopeful expressions, I couldn't bring myself to shut the door. "Just for a few minutes," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. Mia immediately wrapped her arms around my waist, while Tyler squirmed to be transferred from Janet's arms to mine. Despite my reservations about their mother's presence, I couldn't help but smile as I hugged them both. I had missed them terribly. "Nice place," Janet said, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Her eyes swept critically over my thrift store furniture and half-unpacked boxes. "A bit small, isn't it?" "It's perfect for me," I replied, setting Tyler down so he could explore. "How did you find me?" she shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache despite everything. "Tom saw you getting off the bus near here last week. We've been checking apartment buildings in the area ever since." The thought of them systematically hunting me down sent a chill through me, but I tried to keep my expression neutral for the children's sake. "Janet, why are you here? I've made it clear I need space right now." "Space?" she repeated incredulously. "You disappeared without a word, leaving Mom and Dad devastated. You've ignored all our attempts to contact you. You've made the kids cry because they miss their aunt. And you call that needing space?" I took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Rivera's advice about maintaining calm and clarity when confronted by family members. Yes, I needed space after years of being taken for granted and taken advantage of. I left a note explaining that I was moving out. "I blocked your numbers because the messages you were sending were manipulative and hurtful." Janet rolled her eyes, a dismissive gesture that had infuriated me since childhood. "Always the victim, aren't you? Poor Shirley, so put upon by her loving family." "Mommy, don't be mean to Aunt Shirley," Mia said suddenly, looking up from the peace lily she had been examining. "You said we came to visit because we miss her." Janet flushed slightly, caught in her own manipulation. "We do miss her, sweetie. I'm just trying to understand why she left without saying goodbye." I knelt down to Mia's level, avoiding Janet's gaze. "I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye to you and Tyler. That wasn't fair to you. But sometimes grown-ups need to make changes in their lives, even when it's hard." "Are you coming back home?" Tyler asked, his small face serious. Before I could answer, Janet cut in. "That's actually why we're here. Mom and Dad are having a family dinner tomorrow night. They want you there. They're willing to forget everything that's happened, the way you left, the nasty text about the bank account, all of it. They just want their daughter back." I stood up slowly, anger building inside me. "Forget everything that's happened? You mean pretend it never happened so we can go back to the way things were? That's not going to work, Janet. I'm not going back to being the family doormat." "Could you not do this in front of the kids?" she hissed, glancing at Mia and Tyler, who were watching us with wide eyes. "You're the one who brought them here as emotional leverage," I pointed out quietly. "But you're right. They shouldn't have to witness this." I turned to the children with a forced smile. "Hey, how about you two go check out the view from my balcony? You can see the park from there." Once they were outside, sliding the glass door closed behind them but still visible through the blinds, I turned back to Janet. "I'm not coming to dinner. I'm not ready to see Mom and Dad, especially not if their idea of resolving this is to pretend it never happened." Janet's facade of friendly concern dropped immediately. "Do you have any idea what you've done to them?" Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. Mom cries all the time. They're both worried sick about you, and you're just... What? Living your best life in this tiny apartment, playing house while the rest of us deal with the fallout? The fallout of me removing myself from a situation where I was constantly exploited? Where I was charged rent while you lived rent-free? Where I was expected to babysit your kids whenever you wanted, help mom with housework, drive dad to appointments? All while working full-time and getting zero help or appreciation in return? I kept my voice low, but couldn't hide the intensity of my feelings. And let's not forget that they emptied my bank account and then sent me a bill for $50,000 for the cost of raising me. Janet had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable at the mention of the bank account. Dad was upset. He wasn't thinking clearly. And the bill was just to make a point. They don't actually expect you to pay it. The point being that I should be grateful they fulfilled their basic legal obligation as parents. That I somehow still owe them for doing what they chose to do when they decided to have children. I shook my head in disbelief. The fact that you're defending this behavior just proves why I needed to get away. She sighed dramatically. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came to try to fix this mess before it tears our family apart completely. Can't you just come to dinner, hear them out? For me? For the kids? Don't use your children as emotional pawns, Janet. It's manipulative and unfair to them. I glanced at Mia and Tyler on the balcony, their innocent faces pressed against the glass. I love them and I miss them, but I won't sacrifice my mental health and self-respect even for them. So that's it? You're just done with us? With your family? I considered her question carefully before answering. I'm done with the version of family where I give everything and receive nothing. I'm done with being exploited and gaslighted and made to feel guilty for having normal boundaries. But if any of you, are willing to establish a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, I'd be open to that. Eventually. Janet stared at me as if I had started speaking in tongues. The concept of mutual respect within our family dynamics was apparently so foreign to her that she couldn't process it. Finally, she shook her head. You've changed, Shirley. I don't even recognize you anymore. I hope that's true, I said quietly. Because the person I was before was so desperate for approval and connection that she let herself be used for years. I don't want to be that person anymore. She called the children. In from the balcony, her movements stiff with anger. Say goodbye to your aunt, kids. We need to go. Mia wrapped her arms around my waist again, holding tight. Can't we stay longer? We just got here. Not today, sweetie, Janet said firmly. Aunt Shirley is busy. I knelt down and hugged both children, properly, fighting back tears. I love you both so much, and even if we don't see each other for a while, that will never change, okay? Can we call you sometimes? Mia asked hopefully. Before I could answer, Janet intervened. We'll see. That's up to your aunt. The subtext was clear. If I wanted access to the children, I would need to come back into the family fold on their terms. As they left, Tyler turned back in the doorway and waved with his whole arm, the way small children do. Bye, Auntie Shirley. I love you this much. He stretched his arms as wide as they would go. I love you that much too, I called after him, waving until they disappeared around the corner toward the stairwell. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against it and finally allowed the tears to come. The visit had been both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful to see the children, terrible to be confronted with Janet's manipulations and the implicit ultimatum she had presented. Dr. Rivera had warned me about this in our one-on-one session earlier in the week. Children are often used as access points to try to pull estranged family members back into dysfunctional systems, she had explained. It's perhaps the most difficult aspect of maintaining boundaries with family, the knowledge that innocent children may suffer consequences they don't deserve or understand. We had discussed potential solutions, sending cards and small gifts directly to the children, maintaining minimal contact with their parents solely for the purpose of arranging occasional visits, even legal options like partial grandparents. Rights, though in my case as an aunt, those would be limited. But ultimately, she had emphasized, I needed to be clear about my own boundaries and not allow myself to be manipulated back into harmful patterns for anyone's sake, even the children's. In the long run, modeling healthy boundaries is one of the most valuable gifts you can give them, she had said. They're growing up in the same dysfunctional system you did, seeing that it's possible to step out of assigned roles and prioritize. Your own well-being might be the permission they need someday to do the same. I hoped she was right. I hoped that someday Mia and Tyler would understand why their aunt had disappeared from their daily lives. I hoped they would learn from my example rather than resent me for my absence. For now, though, all I could do was continue building my new life and trust that eventually a path would emerge that would allow me to have relationships with the children without sacrificing the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. The next day, Sunday, I woke up with a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. It was the day of the family dinner Janet had mentioned, the dinner I had refused to attend. Part of me wondered if I had made the right choice. Would it have been so terrible to go, to try to mend fences, to give my parents the chance to apologize and make things right? But then I remembered the bank account, the $50,000 bill, the years of being treated as less than Janet, of having my accomplishments minimized and my needs ignored. The pattern was too consistent, too deeply ingrained to be resolved over a single dinner where I would be outnumbered and likely steamrolled into accepting their version of events. No, I had made the right decision. But that didn't stop me from feeling the weight of it, the knowledge that I was actively choosing to remain separate from the only family I had ever known. To distract myself from these thoughts, I spent the day exploring my new neighborhood, wandering through a small bookstore I hadn't visited before, buying fresh produce at a farmer's market, and finally stopping at a cafe for lunch. As I sat at a small table by the window, watching people pass by, I realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt peaceful. The constant background hum of anxiety that had accompanied me throughout my adult life, the worry about disappointing my parents, about not measuring up to their expectations, about failing to be the daughter they wanted me to be, had diminished to a barely perceptible whisper. In its place was a growing sense of self-trust and confidence, a belief that I knew what was best for me and had the right to pursue it. Back at my apartment that evening, I decided to cook myself a proper dinner rather than relying on takeout, as I had been doing frequently since moving out. Mr. Chen had given me some vegetables from his garden, and I had picked up fresh pasta at the farmer's market. As I chopped and sautéed, I found myself humming, a small but significant sign of my improving state of mind. Just as I was sitting down to eat, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marco from the coffee shop. Curious, I answered immediately. Shirley? Sorry to bother you on your day off, he said, sounding stressed. I know it's last minute, but Jenna just called in sick for tomorrow's opening shift. Any chance you could cover? I'd do it myself, but I have a doctor's appointment I can't reschedule. No problem, I said without hesitation. What time do you need me there? 5:30 a.m. to get everything ready for the 6 a.m. opening. You're a lifesaver. After we hung up, I realized that I had agreed without the slightest trace of resentment or martyrdom, the feelings that had typically accompanied any request for help from my family. This was different. I was helping because I chose to, not because I felt obligated or feared the consequences of saying no. And Marco had asked directly, without manipulation or guilt-tripping, and with clear appreciation for my willingness to help. The contrast to my family dynamics was stark and illuminating. Maybe this was what healthy interdependence looked like. People helping each other because they wanted to, not because they were trapped in rigid roles or emotional debt. That night, I slept soundly, waking up refreshed despite the early hour. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived, the streets outside still dark and largely empty. I went through the opening routine Marco had taught me, brewing the first batches of coffee, setting up the pastry case, counting the starting cash in the register. There was something meditative about these simple, practical tasks. The first, customers began trickling in around 6:15 a.m., mostly early shift workers grabbing coffee before heading to hospitals, construction sites, or other workplaces. I greeted them warmly, already knowing many of their regular orders. Around 7 a.m., the door opened, and I looked up from the espresso machine to see my father walking in. My hands froze on the portafilter I had been cleaning. He looked older than he had the last time I saw him, the lines around his mouth deeper, his hair grayer. He spotted me immediately and approached the counter with purpose. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet shop. "Making coffee while your mother cries herself to sleep every night." The few customers present looked up in alarm at his tone. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "Dad, I'm working right now. This isn't the place for this." Conversation. "When is the place, Shirley? You won't answer our calls. You won't come to the house. You wouldn't even come to dinner yesterday to try to work things out like adults." His voice was rising, drawing more attention from the customers. "Sir," said Alicia, the other barista on duty, stepping forward. "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice or take this outside." My father ignored her, his focus entirely on me. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Your mother is beside herself. Janet's kids ask about you every day. And for what? Because we asked you to make dinner? Because we expected you to contribute to the household while you lived with us?" I felt a strange calm descend over me as I observed him. This man who had loomed so large in my life, whose approval I had sought for so long, whose anger I had feared. Now I could see him clearly. An aging man unable to accept that his adult daughter had choices, had agency, had the right to live her own life. "Dad, I'd be happy to talk with you when I'm not at work. But right now, I need to ask you to leave." My voice was steady, surprising even me. "Leave? You want me to leave? Like you left us? Without warning, without discussion, just a note and an empty room?" He slammed his hand down on the counter, making the tip jar rattle. "That's not how family works, Shirley. You don't get to just walk away when things get tough." "Actually, she does," came a voice from behind him. Marco had arrived earlier than expected and was standing near the door with his arms crossed. "And I'm going to have to ask you to leave my shop now, sir. You're disturbing my customers and harassing my employee." "This is between me and my daughter," my father said dismissively. "Not while she's working, it's not," Marco replied, his tone firm but not aggressive. "You can call her after her shift if she's willing to talk to you. But right now, you need to go." For a tense moment, I thought my father might refuse, might escalate the situation further. Then, with a last hard look at me, he turned and stalked out of the shop, letting the door slam behind him. The silence that followed was heavy with awkwardness. The customers were all staring, some with open curiosity, others pretending to be absorbed in their phones or laptops. I felt my face burning with embarrassment. "Take 5 minutes in the back," Marco said quietly. "I've got this." I nodded gratefully and retreated to the small staff room, my hands shaking as the adrenaline ebbed. I had just stood up to my father, something I had never managed to do before. And I had done it without crumbling, without giving in to the guilt and fear that had always controlled me in his presence. When I returned to the front, Marco was handling the small line that had formed during my absence. "You okay?" he asked as I washed my hands and prepared to rejoin him. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find that it was true. "Thanks for backing me up out there," he shrugged. "Family stuff is complicated, but nobody gets to come into my shop and talk to my staff like that." "He took money from my bank account," I found myself saying. "After I moved out, just emptied it completely. That's part of why I cut contact." Marco's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? That's messed up. Yeah, I agreed. It is. We went back to work, the morning rush keeping us too busy for further conversation. But something had shifted inside me. Saying it out loud to someone outside the situation, he took money from my bank account, and seeing the immediate recognition that this was wrong, not something that could be explained away or justified, reinforced my conviction that I had made the right choice in stepping away from my family. My father didn't return to the coffee shop, but the encounter left me shaken and hyper-aware of my surroundings for the rest of the day. I kept expecting him to be waiting when I left work, or to appear at my apartment, perhaps with my mother in tow this time for maximum emotional impact. But there was no further contact that day, or the next, or the one after that. A full week passed in relative peace, with no surprise visits or messages from any family members. I began to hope that perhaps my father's confrontation at the coffee shop had been a last-ditch effort, and that now, finally, they would respect my need for space. I used the reprieve to focus on building my new life. I bought a proper bed frame and a small couch for my living room. I joined Mr. Chen for his weekly Tai Chi class in the park. I attended the support group regularly, finding comfort in the shared experiences and practical advice of others who had made similar difficult choices, and I started making plans for my future beyond just survival and recovery. The assistant manager position at the coffee shop was going well, but I had begun to think about what else I might want to do with my business degree. Marketing, perhaps, or operations management for a small company. I started browsing job listings, not actively applying yet, but getting a sense of what was out there. 3 weeks after my father's visit to the coffee shop, I arrived home from work to find a large manila envelope leaning against my apartment door. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. I brought it inside but left it unopened on my dining table while I changed out of my work clothes and made a cup of tea, steeling myself for whatever it might contain. When I finally sat down and opened it, I found a stack of photographs, childhood, pictures of me and Janet, family vacations, school events, holidays. Beneath them was a letter in my mother's precise handwriting. Shirley, I am returning these photographs to you as they are rightfully yours. Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking since your sudden departure from our lives. While we still do not understand or condone the way you chose to leave, we recognize that our relationship had become strained in ways we did not fully appreciate. Janet has told us about her visit to your new apartment and about seeing you with the children. She says you look well, but unhappy. I hope that isn't true. I hope you are finding what you need in this new life you've chosen. I won't pretend that I'm not hurt by your decision to cut us off so completely. A mother should not have to wonder if her child is safe, if she is eating properly, if she is lonely. But I am trying to respect your need for independence, even though I don't fully understand it. Your father is having a harder time accepting the situation. He feels betrayed and disrespected. The confrontation at your workplace was inexcusable, and I've told him as much. He is a proud man who has difficulty admitting when he is wrong, but I believe in time he will come to see things differently. As for the bank account, that was a mistake made in anger. We shouldn't have done it, and for my part in it, I am sorry. Your father still believes it was justified as compensation for the rent you owed, but I disagree. It was wrong. The bill that was sent afterward was also wrong. A petty gesture born of hurt and anger rather than reason or justice. I am not asking you to come home or to forget what happened. I am simply opening a door, if you would like to walk through it. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime, just the two of us, to talk. If you're not ready for that, I understand. But I want you to know that I miss you, and when you are ready, I will be here. Love, Mom. I read the letter several times, trying to gauge its sincerity. It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from either of my parents. The acknowledgement that taking the money from my account and sending the bill had been wrong was particularly significant. But there was still a defensiveness to parts of it, still a sense that they were the injured parties despite being the ones who had exploited me for years. I set the letter aside, not ready to decide how to respond or whether to respond at all. The photographs, at least, were a meaningful gesture, returning pieces of my history to me, tacitly acknowledging that I had a right to my own past, my own memories, separate from the family narrative. That night, I shared the letter with the support group. The responses were mixed. Some felt it represented genuine progress and a rare opportunity for potential healing. Others were more skeptical, pointing out the subtle ways my mother was still attempting to manipulate my emotions and shift blame. The question isn't whether the letter is perfect or addresses everything it should, Dr. Rivera said thoughtfully. The question is whether engaging with your mother on these new terms would be healthy for you. Do you feel strong enough in your boundaries to meet with her without being pulled back into old patterns? Are you willing to walk away again if necessary? I wasn't sure of the answers to those questions yet, but the letter had accomplished one thing. It had shown me that change, however small, was possible. My mother's willingness to acknowledge some wrongdoing, to return my photographs, to express a desire for reconciliation without making it contingent on me returning to my old role in the family. These were all signs that perhaps, with time and firm boundaries, some kind of relationship might be possible. Not now, though. Not yet. I needed more time to heal, to strengthen my sense of self, to build a life that was truly mine before I could risk reintroducing the complicated dynamics of my family into it. I tucked the letter into my documentation folder and put the photographs in a drawer. When I was ready, I would know. And for the first time, I trusted myself to make that decision based on what was right for me, not out of guilt or obligation or fear. 6 months after walking away from my family, I stood in my apartment and looked around with satisfaction. What had once been a bare, impersonal space was now undeniably mine, furnished with a mixture of thrift store finds and careful purchases, decorated with artwork and photographs, filled with books and plants and small treasures collected during weekend explorations of my new neighborhood. My career was progressing too. The assistant manager position at the coffee shop had led to an unexpected opportunity when one of our regular customers, impressed by my handling of a difficult situation, with an irate customer, offered me a position as office manager at her small marketing firm. The new job would mean better pay, regular hours, and the chance to use my business degree in more direct ways. I had accepted immediately, to Marco's disappointment but understanding. "We'll miss you around here," he said when I gave my 2 weeks' notice, "but this is a great move for you. And hey, you'd better still come in for coffee. Employee discount for life, okay?" My personal life had expanded as well. I had made real friends. Gloria from the thrift store, who had introduced me to her book club. Tara from the coffee shop, who had become a regular movie night companion. And of course, Mr. Chen, who continued to be a steady, supportive presence, teaching me to grow tomatoes on the roof garden and occasionally insisting I join him for dinner, to make sure you're eating something besides ramen. My relationship with my family remained complicated. After much thought, I had responded to my mother's letter with a brief note of my own, thanking her for the photographs and acknowledging her apology about the bank account, but making it clear that I was not yet ready for in-person contact. She had respected that boundary, sending only an occasional text to let me know that she was thinking of me, never pressuring for more than I was willing to give. My father and Janet were a different story. They seemed unable to accept my decision, still sending messages that alternated between guilt trips and anger, still occasionally attempting to track me down through mutual acquaintances. I maintained my distance, ignoring their messages and avoiding places where I might run into them. The one exception I had made was for my niece and nephew. After consulting with Dr. Rivera and giving it careful thought, I had established limited contact with them, sending cards and small gifts for birthdays and holidays, and occasionally sending letters addressed directly to them. Janet had reluctantly allowed this minimal connection, perhaps recognizing that cutting me off completely would only hurt her children. As I prepared for my last week at the coffee shop, I felt both excitement for the future and a deep satisfaction with how far I had come. The scared, confused young woman who had fled her parents' house 6 months ago, leaving a note at each place setting instead of the dinner they had demanded, had grown into someone stronger, clearer, more certain of her worth and her right to be treated with respect. I still had moments of doubt, of course. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I had been too harsh, too unforgiving. Times when I missed the idea of family, the sense of belonging and history that came with those blood connections. But those moments had become less frequent and less painful as I built a new kind of belonging, one based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and exploitation. Dr. Rivera had once described healing from family trauma as a spiral rather than a straight line. You revisit the same issues again and again, but ideally from a higher vantage point each time, seeing things more clearly, responding from a place of greater strength and wisdom. That resonated with my experience. I was still working through the same core wounds, but I was doing it from an increasingly stable foundation of self-worth and healthy boundaries. The night before my new job was to begin, I stood on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights spread before me. The air was cool but not cold, perfect for reflection. In my hand, I held my phone, open to a text from my mother. Thinking of you today. Hope your new job goes well tomorrow. Love, Mom. Simple, respectful of my boundaries. No manipulation or guilt tripping. Just an expression of love and support. After a moment's consideration, I typed back, "Thank you. I'm nervous but excited. I'll let you know how it goes." It wasn't a promise to reconnect fully. It wasn't forgiveness for years of enabling my father's controlling behavior and Janet's entitled demands. But it was an opening, a small crack in the wall I had built to protect myself. A recognition that people could change, that relationships could evolve, that boundaries could create the space needed for healing on both sides. As I pressed send and watched the message status change to delivered, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever happened from here, whether my family eventually learned to respect my autonomy or continued in their old patterns, whether we found a new way to relate to each other or remained at a distance, I knew that I would be okay. I had built this life for myself, piece by piece. I had discovered my own strength, my own worth, my own capacity for setting boundaries and making difficult choices. I had learned that family could be defined by love and respect rather than blood and obligation. Most importantly, I had learned that I deserved more than being the family doormat, more than cleaning up everyone else's messes while my own needs went unmet, more than cooking dinner for people who had never bothered to invite me to their table. I deserved to be the protagonist of my own story. And finally, at last, I was.